Most Eastern religions generally eat the produce from animals, and none exclude meat or fish in entirety. It is worth noting that the Eastern vegetarians are not immune to health issues, and their ever-increasing rates of obesity and diabetes prove that. Ellen G. White was one of 4 founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1844, also promoting temperance and vegetarian health reform. Between 1848 and 1915, Ellen G. White had over 2,000 visions on health reform and prophecy, including her angel's messages on the devastating effects of tobacco, alcohol, and drugs such as tea and coffee. Grains, fruits, nuts, and vegetables constitute the diet chosen for us by our Creator. The term "meat gives you cancer" stems from her visions in 1864, and that care of health is a religious duty. As it turns out, the origins of the current vegetarian guidelines have their beginnings tied to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The American Dietetic Association was co-founded in October 1917 by dietitian Lena Frances Cooper. Lena Cooper was a protege of Dr. John Harvey Kellogg at the Battle Creek Sanitarium, Michigan. She was a vegetarian, and she practiced the teachings and ideology of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Vegetarianism was finally achieved within the American Dietetic Association, now known as the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, in 1988. Of the 9 reviewers of the position of the American Dietetic Association on vegetarian diets, 9 of them had vested interests in a positive outcome. 8 of the 9 reviewers were vegetarian, while the other person was tied to the processed food industry, which is the International Life Science Institute. And 5 of the reviewers were from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, including Kathleen Zolber as a past president of the ADA. The birthplace of the cereal industry was definitely in Battle Creek, Michigan. In the early 1900s, there were around 100 cereal companies, mostly started by members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and many merging over time. The best known to all of us, of course, would be Kellogg's, and it's ranked even now as one of the wealthiest food producers in the world. It's a publicly owned company, whereas Sanitarium Health and Wellbeing Company in Australia, operating throughout Australasia, is wholly owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. As a church-owned food company, they pay no taxes. Seems to me the plant-based mantra we hear over and over is really a cereal and grain-based doctrine for the processed food industry, promoting soy and fake meats, which is essentially anti-red meat and dairy. If you hear the Mediterranean diet touted by Lifestyle Medicine or the DAA, you can rest assured their version does not include saturated animal fats, but instead promotes the olive oil industry, which just so happens to be a major sponsor. I believe that the temperance movement and vegetarian ideology have been driving our guidelines and shaping our rule books for 150 years. So let's take a quick look at the evolution of the dietary guidelines. When did whole grains become the sacred cow of nutrition, and where did the meat go? In the 1940s, nearly half the food guideline was meat and dairy. In the 1950s, we still had dairy and meat up at the top. By 58, the cereals were becoming a bit more obvious, and by 1979, meat started drifting down the page and bread and cereal were climbing up. In 1992, the food pyramid that many of us would have grown up with reflects the demonisation of saturated fats from meat and dairy following the review and acceptance of the vegetarian position paper of the American Dietitians Association in 1888. In fact, look at the explosion of cereal and grain products with a recommendation of up to 6 to 11 servings per day. In the US, the My Plate guide cannot even bring itself to mention the word meat. Instead, it calls it protein, which will include legumes, fake meats, and the soy products. Here's our current Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. Red meat and full-fat dairy are barely there, and as Gary says, you almost need a search and rescue party to go and find them. But there's plenty of processed cereals and grains, soy, fake meat, fake dairy, and fake oils, planted all over our Guide to Healthy Eating. The nutrition rulebooks have been shaped and manipulated to become plant-based. The fear of meat has come from temperance and religious ideology.